There is an episode on Friday that is being released that is visual heavy. So what I'm going to do is that's going to be for free subscribers on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/I'm Matt Elfring. I'm talking to one of the game developers from WWE 2K24, and we're discussing my creator wrestlers. That's great. That's fine. There will be an audio version, but it is going to be super condensed compared to the video version. So instead, I'm doing something I'm excited for. I'm so excited for this person. This is an episode of I Just Want to Talk to Friends, which was the original form of this podcast before I rebranded everything. We're talking to Xalavier Nelson Jr. And I'm like super, super pumped for him. He's always been a fun person to talk to, and I've interviewed him a few times. But his game El Paso Elsewhere is getting a film adaptation, which is really, really awesome. I'm so happy for him. So I'm just going to upload the old I Just Want to Talk to Friends episode, talking to him, which has not been on Casual Yelling yet. This was I Just Want to Talk to Friends. I already said that. But you'll get to hear him talk about El Paso Elsewhere quite a bit, and him being on Forbes 30 under 30 list. This was recorded in December of 2023. So please enjoy. Again, super pumped for him. Congratulations, Xalavier. Now enjoy this episode. Welcome to I Just Want to Talk to Friends, this show about existential dread and getting over trauma. Yeah, exactly. I love it when the guests learn the tagline every week. I'm Matt Elfring. With me this week is someone I have met once but very much enjoyed, game designer Xalavier Nelson Jr. So,
I'm doing good. Today I was listed on the Forbes 30 under 30.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So it feels good. And I'll be honest, a little bit overdue. I don't think that I deserve anything or that I am necessarily entitled to anything. But as the credits started racking up, like when I was hitting 60, 70 games worked on, this year I've now hit 80. I was like, so when is this happening? When does this happen? What is the threshold, Forbes? And the threshold's been passed. I never have to worry about that again. So that's nice.
Also, now that I realize you're 30 under 30, you are the youngest guest that I've had so far.
That's like,
quite a
cool
bit.
/ terrifying.
Yeah. It's not terrifying. It's just most of the people I've had on 30s and 40s, but that's just most of the people in my circle of friends, I guess. I don't know.
You're telling me that you don't have people in your mid-20s that you just hang out with and speak with about back pain constantly as a relatable thing that you both share?
I mean, here's the thing with that. It's like I reached 40 and I kind of realized that like there's a 10-year threshold for people I can be friends with. No offense, but like I feel like when you've hit 40, you've hit a lot of different experiences that most people between 20 and 30 haven't hit yet. So sometimes it's harder to relate to people that age. I'd say it's different with you because you're already well into an industry and well into a career. So there is more relatability between us.
Yeah, I realized this when I started going to music shows. Because I didn't do concerts or any other live music performance thing. I went to my first play, I think last year. I went to my first comedy performance. Been doing a lot of firsts in this past couple years because when I was younger, I didn't appreciate what it meant to experience things live. We have recordings, we have YouTube. Why would I watch Modest Mouse in person? And it turns out the reason you watch Modest Mouse in person is because it's amazing and there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah.
So both doing live performance now and experiencing that for the first time, you end up in the pit with folks who are younger than you or people who are standing by the stage. And I have what's called high fidelity earplugs, and you can just get them for like $15 on your local global corp, uh, mega dome structure owned storefront, but they mean you can hear things clearly, but it's like a manual volume down button. It just brings
Okay.
everything down by like 15 decibels. It
Ooh.
means that I can stand right next to the speakers and be right in the pit at a punk show or a metal show. And
Mhm.
it sounds like as if I'm listening to it comfortably at home rather than it blasting my eardrums, and I can still feel it in my body. So it still has, that whole fun dynamic. And I'm talking to people and sometimes even straight up offering them earplugs, and they're telling me that they've got tinnitus already, that
Yeah.
their eardrums are shaking. They're just like, yeah, I'm having so much fun with this. And I'm like, oh gosh, we are not in the same life stage, even though ostensibly there's only 4 or 5 years between us.
Mhm.
I'm learning, one, age isn't the most important number, but it is a super important number.
Yeah.
And second, life stage is equally important because there's a lot of people my age who were also in that pit, also refused to wear earplugs. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here being like, I have to listen to recordings from my musicians to ensure that the proper audio balance is retained in an upcoming video game. Like, I'm thinking about preserving my ears for professional and
Yes.
personal use. They aren't there yet, or they may never get there, and that's a life stage thing.
Yeah, I still am a drummer. I've been playing for like 25 years. I played in punk bands and toured all throughout my like late teens, early 20s. And it wasn't until my late 20s I'm like, I should be wearing headphones or dampening my drum kit because I'm losing my hearing. I mean, that's just you lose you play loud drums forever in punk bands, you're gonna lose your hearing.
Oh shoot, I hadn't considered that.
Yeah, and now that I do like a lot of like I'm producing another podcast like as a job, and now that I'm doing that, like I notice like I'm missing things. I have to wear these tight headphones. I have to have a whole setup next to me
Mm.
so I can really hear what's being played. I can't do editing through like a speaker anymore because I'm not picking up on everything.
Yeah, and that kind of foresight, there is a version of that that equates to living in fear.
Yes.
But there's also just a lot of very simple things you can do to make sure that your future you is a little bit more grateful, a little bit less resentful of how
Yes.
much of an idiot that you cannot avoid being in your early 20s.
Yeah, there's
And
you're gonna be dumb in your early 20s. There's just no way around it. Everyone goes through it, but you're supposed to learn from that.
it feels like that stage, it feels like it will last forever as well, I'll be
Mhm.
honest. Like, I'm sitting here going, okay, cool, cool. When does this end? When do you get to when do you hit Pedro Pascal stage? Because all I can think of is like dumb 20-year-old, and then you got Pedro Pascal, and I don't know if there's anything in between. And I'm trying to hit the Pedro Pascal sooner than later.
30s for me was all about you figured yourself out, you figured out what you want to do, and 30s is surviving, I think. And then 40s so far for me is just acceptance. Like this is where I am. I'm very happy with who I am as a person. I'm happy with the world around me. That's it.
But when do you just hit happy? Where is happy in here?
40. Here's what I haven't done, which I normally do right off the bat. Tell us who you are, and I've already said your name, but tell us you are and what you do.
Oh yeah. Hello everyone. I'm Xalavier Nelson Jr. I am a game developer. I've worked on over 80 projects across the world of tabletop RPGs and gaming and comics. I run a small studio called Strange Scaffold, which recently released a overwhelmingly positive ranked on
Mhm.
Steam title called El Paso Elsewhere, which is a throwback third-person shooter about a black vampire hunter going into a dimension-shifting motel to destroy the monster he loved before she ends the world.
Whoa. Okay. I haven't played the game yet. I've played your other game. But I have watched a lot of trailers for it. But I'm happy that you have a positive Steam review because it's something when I was at Meow Wolf I interviewed you and we talked about the importance and fear of Steam.
Yes. The self-perpetuating system of this number is not important until it super is, and when you hit that number, there's all of these invisible qualifiers and locks that open for you. It's the difference between having I think it's a 14 charisma score in D&D versus a 15. When you get a +3 versus
Yes.
a +2, it's a giant difference, and that's true for a lot of things in life. But yeah, we thought that the game would get 6s and 7s. It ended up getting 8s, 9s, and 10s, and getting Game of the Year nods. So this has been a really tough year. We also released Sunshine Shuffle this year to really positive reception. Uh, Even though it did temporarily get banned from the Nintendo eShop for allegedly supporting child gambling, it's back now.
What?
Listen, when you make a game that looks like Animal Crossing, but it's actually a hard-boiled, sincere crime drama, and you play poker, you will have questions and perhaps get temporarily banned from a major storefront for allegedly encouraging children to gamble. And because all of your TikToks around the game have been using the tagline, it's the game that doesn't teach children to gamble, and you keep winking at the camera, it does not help you make your case at all. So I've had this wild up and down year of this being a horrific year for game layoffs, all of these really shocking and scary events. But we've got 2 titles under our belt. I've continued to make cool stuff. There are some, in some cases, long-awaited measures of external validation. That means I'm coming into the end of this year quite battered, but also deeply thankful, and also telling people that they can buy El Paso Elsewhere now on Steam and Xbox.
Hey, editor Matt here. I'm never recording through Zoom again. I'm going back to recording through my Rodecaster Pro because everything in Zoom is all over the place audio wise. My voice sounds terrible. I'm not happy about it. And I just, it's, man, there's some like funny stuff in there where we're talking about Rod Ally versus Steam Deck. And I had to cut like 10 minutes of this because Zoom's levels of recording are absolute garbage. I'm so mad. It was some good stuff. Anyway, back to this. I just want to apologize if it kind of comes in a weird spot because there was no real good place to transition over. So apologies. Cut a bunch of stuff out. Recording through Zoom is a bad idea. So after the next 3 episodes, we'll be back on my Rodecaster. Bye.
And I'm deeply, again, grateful for example, just living in this time. I
Yeah.
live in a time that is the only era where I could exist in the way that I do, doing the things that I do, games as a career, uh, being able to do that independently, the number of gatekeepers that exist in the space being fairly low in comparison to the opportunities that are available. I never could have predicted where life would bring me 10, 20 years ago, although I'm pretty young, so like I couldn't have predicted the way that life would go, but I am doing a lot these days to,
Yeah.
in a dark time, really focus down on gratitude and humility, ideally.
Yeah.
Because again, none of these things are owed. Everything is the luck of the draw, and I've had a lot of people who have advocated and supported for me to be able to have this life now.
Yeah. When I was growing up, it was NES. NES was like the second system. I owned an Atari, but I was too young. Like I remember getting the NES and like, there's not independent gaming on there. There was independent gaming on PC, not made by giant companies, but
So there is independent gaming if you count Tengen in that, but that's
yeah,
a
yeah, that's
different.
true. That's true. I take that
That's a
back.
different situation.
They didn't have the Nintendo seal of approval and they had their own specialized cartridges, which I loved actually. But like you had to search out PC and even there wasn't an online community. There wasn't great recommendations. You know, you'd play LucasArts or Sierra games because you knew that. uh, or ID, like id. I
Yeah.
don't know. But finding those independent games is a lot harder. Now we have a community. Gaming is cool. It's not considered for nerds anymore, which I'm so happy about because once that stereotype was kind of brushed away, there's a lot more game designers like yourself, like coming in and bringing new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of telling stories to actual mass audiences, not just quote unquote nerds.
Yeah, we can make games for more people. And unsurprisingly, when you make games for more people make and play video games
Yeah.
because suddenly they say, "Oh, that's for me." Doom might not have been for them, but Stardew Valley might. Stardew
Oh
Valley might
yeah.
not be for them, but I think one of the interesting examples of a mature game that's done surprisingly well lately. I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. But Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of
Yeah.
people who would have never touched a CRPG because that's for nerds, Baldur's Gate 3 has kicked down their frickin' doors and they're making thirst traps about characters in a game that sometimes they'll never play. They're on
Yeah.
TikTok making thirst traps for Asterion, and that's beautiful because it shows that games is growing and the people who care about games is growing as well. So, yeah, a lot of fatigue and a little bit of fear and anxiety combined with deep gratitude is the way that I spend my own existential roller coaster these days. Also
And
wanting to escape the gravitational pull of being a stupid 20-year-old. 25 for me.
but at least we can live in a world where vampires are sexy and you can choose whether or not they bite you.
Absolutely. We have consensual vampire stories, y'all. Heck yeah.
I'm such like I've been playing D&D with the same group of guys, my old bandmates, and actually for 20 something years,
Wow.
and having Baldur's Gate 3 come out was like I was so happy because more people play D&D now, like, which is fantastic, but like having that really realized almost to the point of which we get to play it live together, but having that video game has been like it's made me so happy as a D&D player, not only because I feel like it represents the game very well, but because it gets more people interested in D&D and we can add to our large group already.
Absolutely. The interest level, I think, is really interesting. I don't know if there's a specific term for it, but basically I think the theory goes that somewhere around the Matrix revolutions, we lost monoculture.
Yeah.
Monoculture meant that everyone was referencing Matrix because quote unquote everyone saw the Matrix.
Mhm.
And we finally hit a critical mass on the internet where there was this massive shattering and splintering of audiences. And the biggest recording artist in the world right now might not be someone that you even know, whereas you could not escape the Beatles or Michael Jackson or the Rolling Stones or reruns of Cheers. And there's degrees to which that has made life harder and weirder, and in some cases, objectively negative in specific senses. But there's also this really cool world that exists where a lot of people, you might think everyone has played D&D or everyone's heard of D&D or everyone knows what it means to role play. And it turns out a lot of them didn't. And
Mhm.
we get to have this entire magic of discovery. The whole hipster culture emanated from the idea of people who pursued discovery in a monoculture
Mhm.
and went, ugh, all you listen to is the popular stuff, the billboard. We live in a world where everything, part of the reason that I think that subculture has experienced such derision is because we live in a world where everything is discoverable, and that's a beautiful thing, actually.
Yes.
So many people are coming into D&D right now because of Baldur's Gate 3 or CRPGs, and then they look into Disco Elysium. Maybe they go back to Planescape Torment. Maybe they play Knights of the Old Republic because they're like, wait, there was a Star Wars RPG, and they just didn't know. That's
Oh,
so cool.
a really good Star Wars RPG, not just
So
something
good.
tossed together like the SNES or NES game.
I would argue that the SNES Super Star Wars was not thrown together.
it
It
was
was
it was
intended to
fine.
hurt you, but
Yes.
it wasn't thrown together.
That's the old school game of thought for gaming to me is like growing up playing NES and SNES games, like you're gonna lose a lot. Like
Mhm.
it's going to beat you down. It's kind of that arcade mentality. Like we want you to keep pumping quarters in. We want you to keep going at it. We'll give you a glimmer of hope, and then we're going to take it all away. But I feel like now we're in an era of gaming where that doesn't matter because developers want you more invested in characters and story, and they kind of want to push you forward without it being the easiest thing in the world. Can you kind of, as a game developer, kind of speak to that?
So can you rephrase the question very quickly? I'm sorry.
I'll get old classic Matt rambles for a minute and then throws a question. Can you speak to the idea of as a game developer and storyteller, focusing more on people being connected to characters and telling a story rather than making something overly challenging?
I think this is actually one of the interesting roots in current, I think, divides in games criticism,
Mhm.
because the types of games being made and the types of challenges being offered and the player patterns have overwhelmingly, I would say, irreversibly changed, but a lot of that has not been recognized,
Mhm.
or at least discussed and brought into the light formally. So we actually ran into this on El Paso Elsewhere. On the original Max Payne, these are games that if you are not dying as quickly as you do in that game, you get through them in roughly 4 or 5 hours.
Mhm.
But Max Payne, because players were used to quick saving, and because it looked sick, and because player patterns and what was available to them was different, and because you knew that they were using the mouse and keyboard, because there was all of these things attached, Max Payne can be as brutally difficult as it can be, and be played in patterns that accommodate that difficulty. It's essentially kind of Hotline Miami staccato style, but you're just the person doing the quick saving, quick loading. As a person who just made a Max Payne spiritual successor, I played quite a bit of Max Payne. I have played a lot more even recently as we were finishing the games. So we make El Paso Elsewhere, and I immediately recognize that there's a lot of people who wanted that classic style third person shooter, but I had to go through the process of, okay, a lot of people don't know to quick save, quick load. So in a checkpoint based world, where is the space to avoid player frustration? In a world where there's a lot of different controller setups and the core gamer doesn't all look the same, for better and for worse, what does challenge look like? Who should be able to play this thing? There's members of our team who can't beat a single level, and there's members of our team who can go through levels without dying. Who are we really catering to? And what does that determine for the type of experience we're putting into the world? So a lot of the design decisions for El Paso Elsewhere come from a very intentional, hopefully self-aware reckoning with all of the things that have changed since. And you can see in our reviews this pretty distinct divide in sometimes expectations, where people will give it an 8 or 9 or a 10, but they're like, but this game didn't kill me. I'm not dying in this game. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, you dying was part of a different player pattern and behavior in the past. If you stop paying attention in El Paso Elsewhere, the game kills you quick.
Yeah.
But the speed and frequency with which it hits you with lethality and its intention is very different, because it is all among different artistic goals, it's also releasing in a different world. And I think from the worlds of JRPGs, from the worlds, the way we talk about platformers, even open world games, there's still an instinctual dislike of icons, because there was one period of time where icons were so heavily used
Mhm.
that now people will see icons and they'll instantly go, it's this type of game, not trying to consider why and how icons are used in this game. And it just becomes a flat dismissal of that project in the process. So I'm, from a young age, looking at how and why people think the way they do about the media they consume and that impacts them, and how that's evolved over time, and that wide scope of experience. And now, having been in games for 15 years, because I started very early pretending to be an adult on the internet, as you know, uh, I'm watching in my own time, my own patterns, the players around me change, and we're experiencing a really bumpy ride as a result, because that change is not charted. It is invisible, and it means a lot of great games, a lot of great movies, great TV shows. We mourn their deaths rather than appreciate their existence or attempt to understand them while they're here.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
Sorry for that long ramble, by the way. You just activated my trap card.
Well, I rambled into the question, as I sometimes tend to do during interviews. Uh, and I guess for me, as a gamer, I don't like the term gamer, because it's just, video games are for everyone, so it's just a weird term for me. But
Mm.
I know I'm not the target demographic anymore. I'm in my 40s. I don't have the time to play as much as I'd like to. I've got a wife and a kid and responsibilities that are very different from someone in their 20s, which is more a target market, I'd say, for a lot of gaming companies. But I see something like a Souls game. What was the big Souls game that came out last year?
Big Souls game last year, was it Elden Ring?
Elden Ring, yeah. I bought Elden Ring as like my friend Timur Hussein told me to get it. He's like, it's the greatest game of all time. I'm like, all right, Tam, I'll get this game. I will purchase it, and I will play it. I got 15 minutes in, and I was so frustrated. I had never played a Souls game before, and I said, I am never playing this again. This is not
It
for
was your
me.
first ever Souls game.
I didn't know it was a genre until Tam told me, because that's all he's about.
Oh, as we said, monoculture. I expected that everyone has experienced at least something that has Souls-like elements at this point, but you're coming in blind, and you're just getting blindsided by a giant dude on a horse.
The second you walk into that game, something like a giant werewolf or something kills you. I'm like, I don't know what to do. There's no tutorials. And I understand that this is a genre that expects you to dive right in and just go with the flow and just run and hide. But it just wasn't. I'm actually crossing over with another Souls game there. You don't meet a giant werewolf. I played two Souls games actually. I don't remember the other one. Maybe
Was
it
the
was
other one Bloodborne?
Bloodborne, yeah,
Bloodborne was the one that kills you with the werewolf.
yeah.
Fun fact, I had heard that Bloodborne had such a reputation for difficulty. I missed that in the first room, you're supposed to, or the first time you go to the other world, I don't remember the name for it now, but you're supposed to pick your weapon. Or
Mm-hmm.
no, I picked the weapon, but it didn't equip. And when I hit the buttons, like, because I had played Dark Souls before, but I hadn't played Bloodborne, they changed the interface. I didn't know that the weapon was sitting in my inventory, and all I had to do was equip it. So I started the game and was like, oh ho ho, I'm gonna have to fight this dude with my bare fists. I went through basically the entire first zone of the game just fighting with my fists, because I knew the reputation of the game, and I thought that the entire point was to make me go through a moral crucible. Then I hit a combination of buttons, and it pulled up an inventory interface, and I was like, oh God, I'm so stupid. And the rest of that game, in comparison, felt totally easy, totally doable. First zone of Bloodborne, fist only run by accident is, I think, a perfect way of encapsulating also how like reputation can grow a thing, and you're like, ah ha ha, I'm supposed to actually be thinking that I suck shit and everything about this feels bad. No, you just didn't find the equip button.
How do you make that balance when you're kind of going into a game of designing it of uh do you think about reaching more of a casual gamer, or do you uh think more about kind of reaching someone that wants that extreme challenge?
I calibrate this based off of the game, but I know that my inherent design patterns is that I care more about people experiencing specific feelings and vibes than about them experiencing challenge necessarily, or challenge how we would normally define that. So Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator also got hit with some questions around its challenge. They're like, the number just goes up. When stocks go up, then I sell my stocks and I make a bunch of money. And when stocks go down, I just buy a bunch of money. And when I hit a certain threshold of money, even if the stocks go up or down, I can just wait until the stocks are up again and I make massively more money and the market can't touch me. And I was like, that's so weird. Wouldn't it be messed up if actual financial systems ran just like this? That would be wild, right? Like, the idea of making Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator a challenging game and how you do that, or what involves challenge in, we've done a bunch of different genres at this point. Mr. Bucket told me to being a survival game, where the interesting thing about that game for us and that we wanted for players was not necessarily that you are struggling for survival. It's that you are dealing with the loss of your tools of survival each in-game day. So yeah, I'd say that I think about challenge in weird ways, and a lot of players challenge or have I died or how many times did I restart that boss and did it feel fair is one of the few explicit things you can point to say whether or not a game is good or bad. And I even see this happening on the critical side in a really interesting way, where if a critic cannot get through a game, and I admit I even was like this during my days as a journalist, there is this expectation of, oh, this is for better players than me. This is beyond me. And in a sense, especially if it doesn't feel explicitly unfair, it's of a higher plane rather than anyone can play this. Therefore, it's not as challenging, prestigious, worthy. As I said, we're in this really interesting space right now of overall consideration of the media we gather, both as players and as critics, I'd say even as developers. And that means that the abstract idea of challenge, does the game have icons? Does it use pixels? Does it have ray tracing? There's really minute things that, because they are the only things we can explicitly verbalize about whether or not this experience touched us and how it touched us, it is what we latch onto to define whether or not a game is good.
You think about, I think that's because from a developer's perspective, but you think about gaming in such a deep and focused way. Uh, do you hope that the people playing your games are getting that same experience? Because maybe we don't always think about it like surface level like that, but you're so entrenched in this world.
Yeah, and I think this becomes especially visible when you talk to people who aren't invested in games. So, El Paso Nightmare is the prequel to El Paso Elsewhere. We released it as a surprise Halloween game last year. My sister saw the trailer for it and she was like, that's so cool. And I was like, yeah, it uses all of the same stuff that we're going to be using in El Paso Elsewhere. She said, wait, what? Because the game was in first person. As we talked, I realized that she thought the game was higher quality than a low poly third person game. Both low poly, both using the exact same art style and assets.
Uh-huh.
But El Paso Nightmare, being in first person, had this sense of groundedness and prestige that made her go, whoa, this is so much more immersive. And a lot of game players might look at that and say, that's so basic, first person versus third person, and then realize, oh gosh, every time I see a game with zombies in it, I just automatically think that it's not good.
Yeah.
Especially if I came from a certain era of games. There's an era of gaming that I think we're both intimately familiar with, where now people are seeing licensed games as, oh, cool, a game that will be from a good developer working with a big license, RoboCop Rogue City. For a lot of years, the good licensed game, Chronicles of Riddick, was such a revelation. Arkham Asylum was such a revelation because it was like finally a game that was so interesting and compelling in its own right and used a license. We now live in that world very solidly now, as IP is seen as a safe investment for companies, so they're willing to pump more money and put really solid developers behind licensed titles for the most part now. That was not the case for most of gaming history.
Yeah.
The license was the thing that you paid for, so you could spend less on the game and make more money in bulk volume, hopefully.
Yeah, every
So
Marvel and DC game during the NES, Sega, Super Nintendo era, for the most part, were all garbage. I mean, we had uh, THQ is a good example. I think THQ gets. Hey, editor Matt here. I totally meant LJN, not THQ. LJN crapped on way more than it should. There are some decent games out there,
absolutely.
but it
And a lot of those games, whatever they did do that was right, because they used the license, they were immediately seen as cheaper, so that thing would get ignored.
yeah, I don't think Back to the Future is a bad game. I don't think Wolverine's a bad game. Yes, they
X-Men
did some bad
Origins
games.
Wolverine was amazing.
Yes, I had that's my childhood is playing Wolverine. Sure, I lose health when my claws come out. I don't care. I want to fight Sabretooth. Like I had fun. It's NES. Those games are hard as hell.
So, yeah, I think that in general, games is in a buck wild space. That means, and all media is in a buck wild space where we are using, if only because we're surrounded by so much stuff, we're using very surface level things to indicate goodness or badness, and that thing changes sometimes by the week. So, for the world of interactive entertainment, when a game, especially of a high budget, will take 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that must be a terrifying mental space to inhabit. I hope that this genre is still something that people respect when the game comes out, is a legitimate thing you got to think about.
Yeah. I do want to bring this back before we wrap things up, but El Paso Elsewhere has an original hip hop soundtrack. I I I love the idea of uh meshing genres. I like the idea of original music. Most games use original music. I like the idea of like really crafting a story with music that may not seem on its surface to fit with it. So, could you please tell us about the soundtrack for El Paso Elsewhere and how that came together?
We didn't want to do a hip hop soundtrack. We wanted so desperately to not do a hip hop soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
But the early tests we did with music in that game, nothing was working.
Mm-hmm.
We had some stuff that was kind of working, but on our mood board, there was an audio section and it said, our intended direction is existential violence. And it listed all of these tracks, and all of those tracks, importantly, used lyrics as a counterpoint and vocals as a counterpoint to the music. In the meeting where we were trying to nail down exactly why the game wasn't working from a auditory standpoint, me and RJ Lake, we basically simultaneously realized, oh gosh, it's because the tracks don't have lyrics. We're going to have to make an album. The literal term used, I think, was, oh fuck, we're going to have to do a hip hop album, aren't we? And then we said, well, we can't do a concept hip hop album. Deltron 3030 exists. We aren't going to be able to beat that. Whatever we do, we'll do hip hop stuff, but we aren't going to do a concept album. It's now a hip hop horror concept album. Being dragged kicking and screaming by the game we were making to try to do it justice and what fit from an auditory standpoint was how that soundtrack came together. And you can really feel the difference, I think, when you realize this game is full of needle drops, because the game is influencing the music, which goes back and influences the game, and that cycle means that you as a player are stepping into something that's uniquely holistic and weird. I hesitate to compare us to Sayonara Wild Hearts because that's such a transcendent, musically centered, much higher budget experience. But I'm really proud of what we ended up pulling off there. I did vocals and lyrics, and RJ Lake did the composition and production and even hops on the mic in one of the tracks. And what you see there really is an album that followed what felt natural and right. It's a giant risk, especially compared to, say, more of the new metal style stuff that exemplifies the Max Payne era. But we've seen people fall in love, and now it's going to be on a vinyl. And that existential shock of a song that I was humming for years, not only did we make that, but now other people are humming it or hearing it in their heads. I'm learning a lot. We've covered a lot in this conversation how small things of perception or of player. No, I just go with perception. Small things of perception impact the way that you are viewed and the way that you can survive and make a living as a commercial artist, which means everything has a level of risk attached, even if you're doing something quote unquote safe. And I'm learning that taking those risks is in a lot of cases also one of the few ways you can make sure that you properly reach people. We're in an era where more things are competently made than ever because tools are more accessible than ever, and fewer of those things actually genuinely reach you as a human being. They are content for the content mill. They are a city builder because people buy city builders, right?
Yeah.
And El Paso Elsewhere takes those big risks and swings in ways that hopefully people liked. It seemed like they like it, and I hope I get to make a lot of other things that can reach people in that personal way. Because especially if I'm going to spend several years on a thing, I don't see the point in doing anything less.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're 30 under 30, so you have the prestige. You have what was it, 80 games under your belt at this point?
Over 80. So
Over
I think
80.
I'm around 85 now.
Which is, you're so young and you have so much. Like, look at all these piles of things I've already accomplished. You are much more accomplished for your age than most people, which is a great thing, and you should be super proud of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It feels like that carries a lot of additional fear and expectation. What if El Paso Elsewhere 2? We were actually talking about this. The literal example was El Paso Elsewhere 2, which we're having discussions about and talking about what that looks like.
Mhm.
The discussion was my most natural writing style is actually not rap, it is pop punk. And we were like, what if we go pop punk for El Paso Elsewhere 2? And then it's like, God, people loved El Paso Elsewhere. If we go pop punk for the second one, we aren't going to be pissing off the Max Payne people now. If they are super attached to a very specific idea of Max Payne, we're going to be pissing off the El Paso Elsewhere people potentially. So I definitely feel this weight attached to doing a lot of stuff. But I will say one freeing thing is there's very little to prove.
Yeah.
I've done the things in so many areas already. All I care about at this point, honestly, also confronting a lot of personal insecurities, is I just want to keep making cool things and
Yeah.
talking to good people and doing it alongside good people. If I can keep doing that, I don't care if
Yeah.
the thing sells 1,000,000 copies or gets an 8, a 9, or a 10. Just surviving to the next day, even if you make quote unquote lesser art. I'm a 30 under 30. I've got the BAFTA nomination. There's I don't I've one of my early artistic heroes, and this probably says a lot about me, is Adam Sandler.
Mhm.
because the man pulls out a Reign Over Me or a Punch Drunk Love or an Uncut Gems every so often just to show he can do it.
Yeah.
And then he goes back to making wild movies with his friends that
on vacation.
20 million people, yeah, on vacation that 20 million people see on Netflix, and that is profitable before it even comes out. Like
Yeah.
Jack and Jill, he's like, yeah, I'll just make Coca-Cola the center point. Will you pay me enough that this already goes into profit? Great. That's what it means to me, at least, to be an artist.
Yeah.
Survive to the next day. Do some stuff to show just how broad your range and your skill can fly. But aside from that, if you wake up tomorrow and you can do the thing you love for a living, then you've won.
Yeah.
Fuck the haters.
Completely agree. This is where I tell you, plug all the things you want to plug.
El Paso Elsewhere, out now on PC via itch and Steam. It's also going to be coming to GOG very soon. I can say that exclusively here. It's also on Xbox. Strange Scaffold, you can follow the work of my studio at Strange Scaffold on TikTok, X, and other platforms. You can follow me at WRIT Nelson. Sorry, I'm just trying to be accurate here. The band formerly known as Twitter. You can follow me at Rit Nelson on all sorts of social platforms. I make cool games with cool people. The stuff that's most immediately on the horizon is Isopod, made by the Webbed team. It's in 3D. It's a thoughtful platformer about destroying capitalism, and you're a roly-poly bug who gets to do that by fighting a fire ant conglomerate. The other game is Defender's Quest 2, which is the sequel to a game I played and saw when I was much younger. It was one of the first big indie hits on Steam. It took them 10 years to pull together this second thing, and they asked me to join the team and to help them ship it. And now it's coming out in the near future. So Defender's Quest 2 Mists of Ruin is coming soon. And you can wishlist that alongside Isopod on Steam now. So all I'd say is I'm doing a lot of stuff. If you look in my direction, there will always be something new, and I can't thank everyone enough for their consideration, support, and you for having me on. This has been such a blast.
Well, you're more than welcome. I appreciate you coming on, because it's very odd to me sometimes where I ask somebody in a higher echelon, I'm like, hey, you want to come on this show where there's no format, we just chill out and talk? And people say yes, and I'm just like, what? Why? No one listens to this show. It's very limited people who are following me for my entire career. But I appreciate you coming on, and listeners, I appreciate you guys for some reason subscribing to my weird Substack, which is just me ranting about the circus or whatever I'm doing this week.
I want to hear rants about the circus. I'm going to check out the Substack. I didn't know that it existed. That's great.
Yeah, it's just about sensory overload and having to deal with lights and sounds. And it was a rough view, but I liked the fact there were no animals there. It made me happy.
That is a beautiful thing. Let's take the animals out of the circus.
Yes.
Let them loose on the streets, tearing down the corrupt houses on which the rich used to eat us and consume us upon their altars of flesh, etc., etc.
That's where we're leaving it. See you later. Congrats to Xalavier on all his success and the fact that El Paso Elsewhere is being made into a movie. That's so cool. I'm very, very proud of you, Xalavier. So if you really enjoyed this show, rate us and review on Apple Podcasts. I don't know, just listen if you like the show. You're listening now if you've made it to the outro. Anyway, subscribe to the Patreon, which is patreon.com/I'm Matt Elfring. You can watch the pretty much mainly visual episode of Casual Yelling, where I talk to WWE 2K24 dev Brian Williams, and it's a really cool, fun episode. It's silly. There's no real information you're getting about a video game. It's just me showing off silly wrestlers. That's it. Also, go buy El Paso Elsewhere on Steam. You go play that game. It is super cool. I'm really enjoying what Strange Scaffolding is putting out right now. The song that you're listening to right now is called Gilded Age by the band The Muggles, singer Tom Wanderer, bassist Andrew Parks, guitarist Will Ash, drummer Matt Elfring. Listen to that. Look at that. The drumming is so boring. I got much better as a drummer, don't worry. But I'm 40 now, so no one wants to hear it. We'll see you next week. Bye.